Hello, and welcome to Thank You Dark,
where two spirit-obsessed storytellers take you on a theatrical tour of the paranormal.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Thank You Dark. I'm JJ.
And I'm Mia.
Hi, Mia.
Hey, JJ, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here. What can I say? It's been a long time coming. How are you doing?
I am so good. It's the first episode of the podcast. A long time coming for sure. This has been months in the making. And I am so excited. I've got like pre-show jitters going on. I'm so ready for the spooks.
I'm excited that you're excited because I also know that you just had surgery.
I did. That's why normally we would be recording in the same space. But first episode of all episodes, I think we're both tucked back into our closets.
Yep.
I am nestled into a pile of blankets and pillows. It's quite nice. Maybe a little toasty, but
I imagine.
I've built myself a podcast cocoon.
That might be something that we can market and trademark and sell. Cuddle up in your cocoon and listen to some spooky theater stories.
Oh my God.
I think we've got something, baby.
That is the perfect Saturday night.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad that you're doing well, and I'm glad that you're excited. I was thinking maybe for this first time off, we can give the listeners a little bit of like an outline of what they can expect from us.
For sure, yeah.
All right. So I think, we're going to kind of take turns. This week, I'm going to tell a spooky ghost theater story. And next week, Mia will get to tell a story. And I think we'll just kind of go back and forth, at least for this beginning, at least for starting out the podcast. I think that's kind of what we're going to do. And then we're going to end each episode with kind of like either a personal story or a listener story or someone we know, or like maybe an interview if we can, and all kinds of weird stuff at the end. Yeah.
For example, like JJ's gonna start us off this week, and then at the end of the show, I have got a story from a friend that I am gonna share. And then next week, I get to tell my big ol' story, and JJ's gonna bring along a little bit of spooky content there at the end to share. Balance the workload, make the episodes a little bit more bite-sized for you guys. And then we'll see where it goes.
Yep, that sounds good to me. I am excited for the spooky bonus content. Bonus alert!
Yup. Mm-hmm.
Yep, I think it speaks for itself.
It does.
But I was also thinking for this first episode, maybe we should talk a little bit about like why we felt compelled to do this thing, why we're doing this podcast in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Not just for the spooks and the scares, but I mean, I think this podcast really marries at least I know we have bonded over the years over our love of both theater and ghosts. We've worked together in theater for many years. But it may very well be my two favorite subjects on the planet, theater and ghost stories.
Oh yeah.
And what a wonderful way to continue storytelling in such a time where it is difficult to find ways to tell new stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the many reasons I'm very excited about this show that we're making is, so we went to quarantine, and I didn't step foot in the theater that I work at for like 6 months solid. But security, protection services, we call them, had to be there. And when we came back after 6 months, I found the PS officer that tells me all the spooky, weird things that kind of go on at the theater. And we love the weirdness and the spookiness together. So we always, connect through that. But I came up to him and I was like, hey, so since we've been gone, do you think, have the ghosts been extra active, or you think they're just happy to get some peace and quiet finally? And he was like, oh man, if anything, there hasn't been any kind of activity going on. Nothing. And that made me kind of sad.
Yeah, that's
That's
really kind of a bummer. It makes me feel like the ghosts are down, or feeling low because of the lack of energy in the building.
Right. And whatever, the reasoning or rationale, if people just aren't around, or if the energy isn't there from the shows and the hustle and bustle, or while the lights are off on Broadway, maybe the ghosts are too. I don't know. But I thought this would be a fun way to kind of honor theater traditions in a way, to tell unique stories that we love to hear, as silly as they might be sometimes, but also just to honor the ghosts themselves and make sure that every ghost has its story told.
Absolutely. I mean, they're theater ghosts that they must love attention. I mean,
right. It's a weird place to inhabit if you're going to be a ghost, so you got to be kind of a weird inhabitant.
I mean, if I were to haunt anywhere, a theater would be my place of choice.
Oh yeah, top pick.
For sure.
I'd watch all the shows. I'd be so jazzed about it. Like if I die and I wake up and I'm a ghost, and I am the ghost.
Mm-hmm.
I just only hope that I get to pick where I haunt and that I can pick like the coolest theater possible.
Absolutely.
Well, all right. I don't know about you, but I think we might be ready for our first story.
Is it time?
I think
Is
it's
it time for the spooks and the scares?
I think it might
alrighty,
be.
JJ. Going dark?
Thank you, Dark. For my story this week, I am taking us to a theater tucked away in Logan, Utah. My father was born in Logan, and later I would be as well, and while I didn't quite grow up there, it will always feel at least a little bit like home. I hold an estranged connection and distanced admiration with the town, but also one of its theaters, the Kane Lyric Theater. And while I never performed there, at least 6 family members I can think of off the top of my head have graced its stage at some point or another. I saw my first real, legit, acted by professionals getting paid to act play in this theater.
That's a special place.
Isn't it, though? Yeah, it was very, very nice, very special. And I'll always hold that connection there. And many of my family members who have been involved in some way or another throughout the years, a couple of my aunts in particular, told me stories when I was younger, and that's how I came to learn of the ghost at the Lyric Theater. During some research of the theater itself, I found an interesting story that had never been told to me before by my aunts during those sleepless sleepovers at my cousin's house. And to be completely accurate, I found several variations of the story, which I have done my best to stitch together using the most common threads. And apparently, this mysterious ghost... Did I say mysterious? I like it. That's my new thing. This mysterious ghost I had heard about as a kid had a name. Everett Jones. That's right, a ghost with a full name. I love me a ghost with a full name.
It's uncommon.
Exactly. Everett isn't a name that you hear very much because, at least these days, because he's believed to have died back in 1913. Previous to its life as the Lyric Theater, it was once the Thatcher Opera House. And like many theaters of the early 1900s, a fire caused the building to burn and need to be completely rebuilt. And when it was, it stood as the Lyric. And it is believed that when the theater opened in 1913 as mostly a vaudeville house and movie theater, a production of Hamlet was set to be their premiere play, performed by a traveling theater group. In Act 5 of Hamlet, there's a scene with 2 gravediggers, and it's a more comedic beat in the drama, and it can make for a really memorable scene when it's done well. On this particular evening, Gravedigger 2 was just connecting with the audience on another level. They loved him. He had them, He brought the fire, as I like to say, on this historic opening night. And while he vibed with the audience, his counterpart, Gravedigger 1, felt frustrated and haltered in his delivery. And he felt he was an older, more seasoned actor than Gravedigger 2, who had only recently joined the troupe. And Gravedigger 1 certainly did not feel admiration for his scene partner, but rather spite and resentment for Gravedigger 2, played none other than the leading role of our tale tonight, Everett Jones. The story has it that during curtain call, Gravedigger 1 had just finished bowing when Everett took his own, and the audience rose into a standing ovation just for him, just for Everett. He had stolen the show. But that night, down in the basement where the dressing rooms were, something may have happened. Something must have happened down in the dark hallway at the bottom of the stairs, because the next day, Everett didn't show up for his call time.
Oh, no.
He didn't show up at all. He was eventually replaced with a swing for the night, and the show went on. After days of no word or sign of poor Everett Jones, eventually the troupe had no option but to leave town and go on to their next booked show. And as the show appeared at the next theater, the story goes that come Act 5, Gravedigger 1 held in his hands a new prop. A prop so strikingly realistic that it made the following iconic scene with Hamlet even more impactful. And that prop, of course, being the skull of poor Yorick, or in this case, poor Everett.
No. Oh my God.
And some stories do even go on further to tell of a headless body being discovered, hidden in the basement of the theater weeks or even months after the troupe's departure, only ever being found due to the smell coming from the basement.
Oh, God. Yikes.
And this podcast, much like theater, requires an important give from the audience and storytellers alike: suspension of disbelief. Like Agent Mulder, I too want to believe.
Yes.
I don't like to dig too much into things like death records or stories. For things like this, I like to leave the idea open-ended. To be honest, I may find some of these details a bit much for various reasons, but it does lay an interesting groundwork for the stories I was told as a kid. And it makes for a pretty interesting history of the theater. Plus, it's fun. Initially, I learned the ghost was a man who always was accompanied by a very distinct smell. My aunts would say it was kind of a musky, dank sort of smell, and not the good kind of dank, I can imagine. Now, Vasco Call, the owner of the Lyric who saved it from demolition, and the man known for bringing theater to Cache Valley, would nonchalantly tell stories, when prodded, of his encounters. Vasco was a brilliant actor, director, and natural-born storyteller. But when he talked about his own experiences, I'm told there was an honesty about how he spoke of meeting Everett late at night while he was working on the set. And I think that we all kind of know those nights. Eventually, you find yourself alone, desperately needing to finish this last coat of paint or what have you before you leave, aching to just get a couple hours of sleep before coming back at it in the morning.
I know them very, very well.
Don't we all? But Vasco would find himself feeling like maybe he wasn't so alone. He would turn to face the house, only to see a man sitting in the house right balcony. Vasco would look at him, and the man would look back. The two would just stare at each other, and then Vasco would turn back to the set and carry on with his project. Vasco would talk about never feeling threatened or like anything was inherently wrong with this man being there at all. Eventually, Vasco would finish up, look back, and no longer see the man. With a shrug, he would turn out the lights and leave. And Vasco was an incredibly interesting man. I would love to see a documentary made about this man. He was just from an age of theater that doesn't exist anymore. And to him, to Vasco, the ghost, Everett, was just a part of it all. Everett was as much an installation of the theater as Vasco was. They both seemed like they wanted to do well by each other, and were there for the same reason: their love of theater and the lyric itself. Now, not everyone would react the way that Vasco did. So calm, collected, and cool. I mean, would you? I've heard things that I can't entirely explain while sitting in a completely empty theater in the dead of night, but I still had lighting cues to write, so I stayed. What would you do? Now, my Aunt Tracy knows exactly what she would have done because she also had an experience with Everett, though not quite so face-to-face. One day, while she was a member at the Lyric, she came into the box office to get some work done. This is late 1970s, by the way, and at least in those days of the Lyric Repertory Theater, actors were hired with the understanding that they would also help manage the day-to-day duties and help run the theater. On one quiet morning, Tracy knew she was the only one in the building because she had the keys to the place and unlocked the door when she came in. She was walking into the box office when she smelled something, this old, musky sort of smell. But before she could really think much of it, she heard the man who owned the shoe store next door calling in and knocking on the front doors. He had come in that morning to find his own store had flooding in the basement, and he came over to make sure that they weren't experiencing any flooding as they shared a wall down in the basement. Tracy knew the man and said, "Of course, feel free, come on in, head down there." He turned on the lights and went down the stairs behind the stage for a couple of minutes, looked about, and after finding no signs of water damage or leakage, he came back up and he asked my aunt a peculiar question. "So that guy down there, is he your regular janitor?" At first, she was only confused. "What?" my aunt replied. "That guy down there. Is he your regular janitor? He's kind of different, isn't he?" Still more confused than afraid, she asked, "What do you mean different?" Her fear not yet being realized. The man looked back at her and said, "Well, he doesn't like to talk much, does he?" Feeling the weight start to fall on her chest, she mumbled something like, No, I suppose he doesn't talk much." She walked the man to the door, thanked him for checking for any flooding, and let him out. My aunt then turned back toward the stairs leading down to the basement where the lights were still on. She knew she would have to turn them off, but was too afraid to move any closer towards the stairs. She ended up having to call the box office manager, who came in to help her make sure there wasn't anyone down there and help her lock back up. And when she came, the basement was empty. There was no sign of anybody. Tracy's encounter was odd, to be sure, and while I swear I've heard similar stories like that, my aunt is not one to blow smoke or lie about an experience like that. And that was the case for most people in this town. None of them were really that type of person, especially Betsy. As straight-laced a Mormon that Utah had ever known, she was always in the proper state of mind and never one to embellish a story for attention or anything like that. But Betsy also experienced something down in the basement at the Lyric. The cast members would take turns at night shutting down and locking up the theater. And according to my aunt, if it was a woman's turn to close up, usually someone else would wait upstairs by the door in the lobby, so they didn't have to leave the theater alone so late at night. But this particular night, it was Betsy's turn to close up. Her friend waited upstairs by the lobby doors while she was finishing up her post-show checklist. In the basement of the theater were the dressing rooms, bathrooms, and this small boiler room kind of closet were located in one thin hallway. Now, this seems to me to be when most people have their experiences with the paranormal, when they're busy. It's never when you're already sketched out and expecting that shadow in the corner of your eye to be something more than a shadow, but it's when you're busy in the routines that theater gives you. The repetition seems to create a comfortability in the chaos, and I think that's when we're the most comfortable, is when we become the most vulnerable. Anyway, Betsy was finishing up in the woman's dressing room. She had checked the racks, cleared the tables, quickly swept the floor when she wrinkled her nose. And the smell didn't come on strong at first. Instead, it was subtle, hardly noticeable until she was about to leave the dressing room when it hit her like a wall. It wasn't an aggressive sort of smell, but it was permeating. What was that? It smelled old and damp and hot. She turned off the lights to the dressing room and stepped out into the hallway when she saw him. It was the silhouette of a man standing at the end of the hall, just outside the old boiler room.
Oh, man.
Lit only by the glow coming from the bathroom beside her. She saw the man in what seemed to be like older-looking clothes, and she knew she saw him, but also knew that something was wrong with him being there. He wasn't supposed to be there. She called out to him, almost upset by the fright he had given her. "Who are you? You're not supposed to be down here." She turned ever so briefly to turn the lights back on. She turned back around, and he was gone. Without any sort of sound at all, he was just gone. And the smell was gone. Betsy hit the lights in the dressing room with her heart pumping in her throat, and she quickly killed the lights behind her in the bathroom and bolted up the stairs, her feet hammering into the floor so hard that her friend was startled as she ran up to him. Betsy was completely shaken. She doesn't really remember the words that she said to her friend that night, but he recalled her coming up through the lobby trembling as she crossed toward him, her whole body shaking, her mind frazzled, and tears starting to well up in her eyes. She just wanted to leave immediately. And they did leave. But he recalled never seeing Betsy like that before. Sometimes you just know when someone is genuinely, honestly scared, because he had seen real fear in her eyes that night. Years would pass until the Kane Lyric Theater would receive a renovation in 2001. Some say that Everett's spirit disappeared from the theater after renovations. However, online there still seem to be plenty of stories about the ghost of a man who turns the lights on and off in the basement, the ghost of a man who sits in the house right balcony during rehearsals or late nights. And whether you believe ghosts are the spirit of dead people or echoes of energy skipping like a stone through time, or even explainable events that are logical and can be rationally explained, whatever your belief, there's always this undeniable energy in theaters that is unlike the energy anywhere else. This could be said about many locations, but to us at Thank You Dark, there is no place on earth quite like a quiet theater. The magic that can happen inside of a theater can be beautifully and bewilderingly unexplainable. And we are here not to only share those stories, but to celebrate them with you. We want to celebrate ghosts of our theaters across the world. And so tonight, I give thanks to Everett and honor the ghost at the Lyric Theater.
Well done, my friend.
Oh, I thank you.
That was intense. Oh my gosh. Like I love that every theater has a ghost with like a particular ghost most of the time that people like latch onto and will give a name to. But when that ghost just seems to want the best for the theater and just wants to like hang out and be present and be a part of that energy and like seems to pose no real threat, especially when the theater goers can find a comfort in knowing that that ghost is there sometimes too.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something kind of poetic in a way about a ghost finding a home in the one place where everyone's always welcome. You know?
Absolutely. Also, your aunt is super smart because I can't tell you how many times in stories like this where you hear something in a basement or someone goes, "Who is that?" in a basement, and the other person just like barrels on in to check out what's happening. Because like we're telling ghost stories here, but you never know when it's just a person hanging out in the basement. I admire her common sense.
Yes, I know, right? It would. I am glad that it was nobody down there, but I'm also glad that she's like, I'm gonna wait till I have some backup to investigate this one.
Also, you said something about ghosts appearing to people when they're at their most comfortable or when they are not looking for the ghosts. And I think you've hit the nail on the head as to why I don't have that many experiences of my own, because I am constantly on alert. I think I want spooky things to happen so gosh darn bad that they just don't happen.
That's fair. Well, maybe that'll keep you protected, you know? It'll keep you on edge about it.
Right.
Yeah, for this first episode, I really had to go with this story because, like, it's a very special theater to me. I saw one summer, my grandma took me to see Arsenic and Old Lace.
Really?
And that was like, that changed everything. That, like, blew my doors down. That was my aha moment.
Arsenic and Old Lace was the first show you ever saw? Arsenic
and Old Lace was the first, at least, like, acted by adults, real-ass play. Absolutely.
That is hilarious because my relative wrote Arsenic and Old Lace.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
I don't... What kind of relative?
I don't remember. He's like a great uncle or something like that. I can't...
that is cool.
I don't remember exactly how he's related to me, but it's on my mom's side. Joseph Kesselring is his name. My mom's maiden name, I think, I could be wrong about that, is Kesselring. Which one, if I ever had to change my last name, coolest name in the world. Kesselring. Love it.
That is
sounds
a cool name.
Sounds like Renaissance-y. I dig it.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, so Joseph Kesselring is related to me somewhere on my mom's side. That is so funny that was your first show.
That is really cool, though. That's awesome. Yeah. And
our friendship is fated, JJ.
It is written in the stars. But yeah, I mean, I remember that summer so well. It was like the summer before high school started, I think. And I remember mentioning to my grandma at one point that I didn't know what, like, electives to take.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really saw it until recently, kind of when I was preparing this story. But I think she was like, all right, I'm going to get him into theater. At least give it a shot, right? So she took me out to go see that show when we were visiting Logan. I think we were up seeing my grandpa and all these other family members that still live up in that area. And yeah, we went and saw Arsenic and Old Lace. And I remember, I am not positive, but I think that Vasco's grandson played the lead that night.
Wow.
Richie, I believe. And I remember looking at my grandma after the show and being like, did they get, like, paid to do that? And my grandma was like, yeah, that we just watched them at work. That's their job. And I was like, sign me up. that's the job I want. That right there, that was amazing.
Man.
And so this theater really is like, I remember aspects of it, even though that was so long ago at this point.
I mean, your grandma shaped your whole future.
Yeah, and I had no idea at the moment. She played a fast card and I didn't realize it. But thanks, Grandma.
So, I actually have, for our spooky bonus content, I have a story from my mom's friend from college. Her name is Sonia. I haven't seen her in quite some time, but I do remember the first time I ever met her. I think we were at a wedding, and I was like 4 or 5 tops. My very first impression of Sonia was at this wedding. She leaned down, she stuck her hand out for me to shake, and she went, "Damn good to meet you."
That's awesome. I like this person.
She's a wonderful human being. And I have a story from her about Greensboro College, where she and my mom went. So I am going to read a little bit of a tale from her. Our college campus was supposedly haunted. Amy, my mom, can tell you all the stories as well as I can. Please note that I do not believe in ghosts. In college, I very much would have liked there to be spirits and whatnot, and I was a cheerful participant in Ouija board shenanigans, etc. And I actually bought past life regression tapes and had parties in my rooms where we did self-hypnosis. Unfortunately, for every supposed spooky thing, an actual explanation existed. Cold drafts in a 100-plus-year-old basement? Every one of them coincided with someone opening a door on the other side of the building. 2 people with the same idea? Not shocking, and a bunch of kids with similar influences and daily experiences. Out-of-body experiences? What a surprise! People hallucinate after days of sleep deprivation. Past lives? Self-hypnosis can only dredge up what's in your own head. Sorry. Mysterious faces in the attic windows? Is it too late to confess that was actually me and some of the tech guys putting masks in the window to fuck with the actors? Also, while I am confessing, me and one of the other guys used to nudge the Ouija planchette when we were getting bored. It wasn't ghosts. It was never ghosts. But I will tell my one spooky story where I don't have an explanation. I had written this out for a different group back in 2020. My BFF and I were the only people in the major who weren't too scared to paint scenery after midnight in Old Main. The 3rd floor was this huge open space where you could spread out. One night, he and I were blasting Meatloaf's second album on the tape deck and working on an enormous backdrop. A muslin sheet that was as wide and tall as the entire back of the stage. The King and I, if you're wondering which show. He was drawing out the elements, and I was coloring them in. Point is, we were not particularly near each other and could not hear each other over the music. I was painting something really fiddly, and he said, about a foot from my ear, "Let's go have a cigarette." I said something like, "You asshole, you nearly made me screw up this section." He raised his voice and said, "Let's have a cigarette. Now." I threw down the brush and said, okay, keep your pants on, let's go smoke," just as he turned off the music. More than 30 feet away from me. He was staring at me, and when I asked how he got over there so fast, he said, "What are you talking about? You wouldn't quit whispering in my ear, and I turned off the music so I could hear you." At that moment, all the lights went dim, and the stairwell door slammed. We decided that we needed a cigarette break, and that break would last until the sun came up. It never happened again. Now for the actual twist ending. I texted the BFF in question right after writing this for the group last year. A group he cannot see, and in which he knows no one besides me. Because I had not thought about this story in at least 20 years. And I was curious to see if he remembered it the same way. He had just finished telling the story to someone else, after not thinking about it for at least 20 years.
Ooh. Ooh. Spooky.
Right? This was a journey for me too. I had read this story back when she originally sent it, but I hadn't looked at it in a couple of months. So it was a journey for me as well. I didn't remember how the story ended. I love the stories that come from like absolute 100% skeptics, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's like they just kind of are in the camp of like, can't explain that one, but it happened.
Yep. Yeah, like, because I don't know what I believe. I have 1,000,001 different thoughts and ideas and theories about what ghosts may or may not be, or if they exist at all. But yeah. I believe that there are things in the world that I definitely don't understand. And I love stories like this, where it is just truly unexplainable.
Absolutely. I think those are the ones that kind of tickle my fancy the most. They're all fun, they're all great, but when the person doesn't believe, they don't believe in the rationality behind what they experienced, it's very fun. I think that only leads to more credibility, you know?
Definitely.
Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight on this dark Monday and giving us a listen.
If you enjoyed this podcast today and would like to hear more, please give us a rating and leave a comment about what you thought.
We would also like to give a special shout out thanks to our dear friend Andy Gerber for his original artwork, and to Toby Lane on Pixabay for allowing us to use their wonderful music.
If you want even more theater ghost stories and additional spookiness, find us on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube at Thank You Dark Podcast.
And just like with theater, we need your help using word of mouth to spread the news about this show and help us get it out there. So if you think of a friend or a family member or a co-worker or a local theater nerd, anyone who likes a good ghost story, please send it their way.
And if you or someone you know has any spooky or unexplainable ghost stories to share with us that you would like to hear on the show, send them our way at thankyoudarkpodcast@gmail.com.
Absolutely. Whether the story is typed out or recorded on your phone or with a mic or sent by a carrier pigeon, we want to hear it. So please send it over to thankyoudarkpodcast@gmail.com.
Thank you again for listening.
And until next time,
going dark!